Hi, I'm Stuart from HiFi PiG. We're at the Bristol HiFi Show 2024, and I'm here with Peter Comeau of IAG. The big brands that you will know are Wharfedale, Audiolab, and Peter is the man behind these brands that you will all know so very, very well. Wharfedale have launched at this show the Super Denta, which you can see here, and Lynette's just been to the launch of that. And I think it's about pound under £1,000, so £999. And
Sure.
we crossed in the corridor and she just went, it sounds stonking. So, but we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about this speaker, which is the Wharfedale Aura. And I'm just going to let Peter talk about it and tell you all about it, where it fits in with the Wharfedale range and all about it. I was told the price of it earlier on, and bearing in mind it's got an AMT tweeter and all the rest of it, and I was slightly gobsmacked at the price. But over to Peter to tell you all about it.
The Aura actually came out of a discussion we had with customers of Wharfedale, because a lot of what we do is driven by how can we better serve our customers, how can we better serve our listeners. And a lot of people had expressed to me how they liked what they'd heard from Elysian, but they couldn't afford it.
And Elysian is the biggest speaker.
It's the biggest one, yes.
£7,000?
Up to £10,000, yeah. And it's a flagship for Wharfedale at the moment. And when I did Elysian, it was very much, how can I make the best speaker that I can without price constraints, because I wanted to show that Wharfedale was more than just a budget speaker maker. I mean, you said yourself, you started off with a pair of diamonds.
I think everybody, in the 80s, 90s, everybody started off with a pair of diamonds.
And before that, everybody started off with a pair of dentists.
Absolutely, yep.
So, yes, you're absolutely right. But, Wharfedale has the technology and always did. If you go back to Gilbert Briggs' time, the Airedale, the Rosedale, these were all expensive speakers for their time. So we wanted to do something equivalent, and that was Elysian. And we've had fantastic response, both in terms of reviews and also from customers as well. It's sold really well. But for a lot of people who want to buy Wharfedale, have that Wharfedale experience, it is fairly expensive. We kept on meeting people who go, I loved what I've heard from the Elysians, but I can't afford them. So, okay, there is a customer requirement, there's a listener requirement. Can we achieve something of the character of Elysian in a slightly lower cost package? And that led us to Aura.
Okay.
So Aura uses the same AMT that we developed for Elysian, uses a different class of drive unit. The Elysian 4, for instance, focuses on, I think, closer to a 9-inch base unit system, whereas with Aura, our biggest is 6.5-inch.
Okay.
In the Aura 3, it's a 5-inch. The fiber matrix that we developed for Elysian, we carried some of that cone technology over to Aura.
And how do you integrate the AMT into that system? I
found when I started working with AMTs, because I've been a fan of the AMT idea since the 70s when I first came across them. It's difficult to realize a good AMT in practice, and even more difficult to design a crossover for it. The part of the loudspeaker that nobody sees is the crossover. You see the cabinet, you see the drive units, you think that's it. But actually, the thing which makes the whole system work is the crossover. And the crossover is where I put hours and hours and hours, usually hundreds of hours, sometimes thousands of hours, into development, because it's so critical to the sound of the speaker. And developing a crossover for the AMT, which I started to do in Elysian, was really, really difficult because it doesn't behave in the way that a pistonic driver behaves. And electrically, it doesn't resemble anything like a pistonic drive. So you have to then get your head around what works and what doesn't. And it was like going back to primary school again. I had to sort of relearn how to actually make it work.
And what do you think the AMT, the speakers that we use in our reference system use AMT tweeters.
Okay.
I love them when they're implemented well.
Yeah.
What do you think an AMT tweeter brings to the party in these speakers?
Well, what an AMT does really well, and I'm sure you've heard this, is its transient performance is so good.
It's just so fast.
And that is because you are squeezing the air rather than pushing the air. And it's a bit like if you take a lemon pit between your fingers and you just apply a little bit of pressure and it flies out at high speed. You know, whereas if you were to throw a lemon pit, it wouldn't go very far.
What great analogy.
It's exactly the same in an AMT. It is squeezing the air between the pleats of the diaphragm. And that requires very little energy. As a result, the diaphragm is very responsive and very fast. And it's also, because it requires very little energy, the distortion's very low. So your detailing is very, very good indeed. If you listen to a brush cymbal on an AMT, it's very close to what I consider the best transducers, which is the ribbon transducer.
They have some kind of air to them and around the sound, which is
and it's
very different.
It's got a sort of freedom to it as well.
Yeah,
which you don't get.
I am a fan. So where do these sit? They're below the Elysian, but they're above. What is the floor?
Evo is the range below,
which is about £1,000 for a
the Evo is fantastic value, and we've done really, really well with it. It's had great reviews. It's been had awards from all sorts of magazines. Done really, really well. So this sits in between.
So the Elysian is up to 10,000.
Yeah.
The Evo is from 1,000.
The floor standards are 1,000 upwards.
So where do these?
So Aura 3, for example, is £3,000 a pair. So we're bridging that gap.
It seems an awful lot of speaker for the money.
Yes, we had somebody in the show today who said, the prices for your speakers. I said, yes. He said, is it English?
Yeah.
I said, no, it's a pair. He said, how are you making this technology so affordable? But because it's what we do at Wharfedale, is we do make high performance affordable. That is what we stand for.
But you're not a budget loudspeaker manufacturer anymore, I would say.
Diamond 12 is a budget range. It's perhaps not as cheap as people who are coming from the smart speaker market would think they ought to have. They'd probably want to buy something that's under £100. We're not, as hi-fi manufacturers, we can't do that anymore. But Diamond 12 starts at £299 a pair and goes up from that.
So how would you describe the sound of Aura?
It's what Wharfedale always does, very natural, very involving. There's a level of warmth that draws you in. I don't mean warmth in terms of coloration, but its ability to give that fullness to the sound of the human voice, piano, orchestra, jazz, rock. It doesn't matter what genre of music you're playing. There is a size to the sound which draws you in, and there's, I would like to say, an almost magic to the mid-range, which is very involving. A young lady came in today, and I could see her moving and jigging around with the music. And I went up to her and I said, well, you know when a hi-fi system is good?
When people move.
It makes you jig around to the music. And she said, yes. She said, I've been all around this show, and this is really the first time I've come in and not only started dancing to the music, but you've played me music that I haven't heard before, and I've loved it.
So when it comes with regards to music, how do you go about voicing a loudspeaker when you're designing? Do you start with something on paper, or do you? How does the design process?
Well, we have to start with something on paper because people now buy with their eyes as much as their ears, and we know that if we can make a speaker look very nice in the home, it will sell more. Understandable. These are pieces of furniture that you need to put in your home. So we start with a two-way conversation between me and the ID designer, the industrial designer who looks after the looks of the product. And he'll say to me, "Can I do this?" And I'll say yes or no. And we sort of have a banter about what I need acoustically and what he needs in terms of looks. And then we'll formulate something based on that. So that then gives us, and of course nowadays we can do that as a 3D model, which is great.
Okay.
So, even before we start, we've got a rendering of the speaker that we can show the marketing team and say, is this something you can sell?
Okay.
Because often you come up with something which, works great acoustically and looks really dramatic, and they go, couldn't possibly sell that. Nobody's going to want to buy that.
What music do you use when you obviously voice the speakers and
Yeah.
you listen to the speakers a lot? What kind of music do you listen to?
Absolutely everything I can lay my hands on.
Okay.
I've got old favourites, which I perhaps start off with because I know what they should sound like. But I'm also very interested in anything new. So anybody who visits my home, okay, what would you like to listen to? Tell me. And of course, from these days of streaming, anything they want, you can play, and they'll pick stuff out of the air. I recently had my niece Emma from Canada come to us, and she had a whole playlist of stuff that I'd never heard in my life, and that was quite sort of ear-opening because the stuff that she had chosen to play was actually really good sounding, and we're using it at this show. It's so good.
Very good. That's quite refreshing because
Yes.
we were in the lift earlier and I've heard someone say, "Please, no more classical music," and that was just so refreshing to hear because we hear Keith Don't Go, obviously, from not the classical music, but that gets played to death.
Yeah.
And it's nice to see brands and people embracing new music and dance music and pop music. And I suppose this is back to the Wharfedale ethos of being where I started with music. I got into it because I was into the music.
Yeah.
And I needed something that was affordable but great sounding. But there seems to be this, in the audiophile world, you've got to either listen to jazz or classical music. And people in the real world, which these are real world speakers, they don't always listen to that kind of music, do they?
No, they don't. You have to, I think, have your ear to the ground as what do people want out of a pair of speakers? And generally, I find they want to be able to play a wide range of music. It's not necessarily one particular genre. So, and I'm lucky. I like music for music's sake. So if somebody plays me something which is musically involving, doesn't matter what genre it's in, that's it. We have various people, a couple of people on our production line in Huntingdon who are into, well, I suppose you could call heavy metal. I don't know whether you call it heavy metal now because I think it's gone beyond that.
It's gone beyond that.
Yeah. But various classes of metal, let's say. And I've been interested to make sure that our speakers accomplish that as well, because it's obviously part of making speakers that sound good. Sometimes I'm asked at shows, what music do your speakers work best on? And it always makes me laugh, because how can a speaker be any good unless it can play every single type of music?
Out of interest, I'm guessing that you have Wharfedale speakers at home.
I have at home whatever I'm working on.
Right, okay,
So,
Fred.
because my buyers are going to be sitting at home listening, so therefore I have to sit at home listening. My family has to enjoy what I take home and work on as well. So it's not right until everybody's enjoying it.
And out of the range, what is your favourite of the Wharfedale loudspeakers?
Oh, well, I mean, I still
The
have a
Elysian.
soft spot for Elysian 4.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And if these come in, they're beautifully finished. And what colours do these come in?
So we are making these primarily in the finish you see here, which is a lovely gloss walnut. And this is a real piano lacquer finish, by the way. It's multiple layers of lacquer, hand polished in between each layer that goes on to give us this beautiful luster.
A reminder of the price again?
$2,999.
Which is outrageous. It really is outrageous. So I think that's pretty much everything about the speakers that we've got there, the Auras and the Elysians and the Evos. Pete, thank you ever so much for talking to us. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much for coming along.
Cheers.